Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the 155th episode of the listener-supported commercial-free Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. If this is your first time listening to Congressional Dish, I am just a person. I'm just a taxpayer who just wants to know what's being done with my tax money and in my name. And I didn't know where to find information that was about that, as opposed to the he said, she said, he's winning in the polls, she thinks the polls mean this, nonstop horse race, all politics, no government garbage that we're fed every day. And so I started watching C-SPAN in my free time and reading government documents, including bills and laws. And surprise, surprise, there's so much going on in our government that we're not being told about. And so that's where this podcast came from, and that's what it still is. It's me trying to figure out what's going on, how it affects me, and what I can do about it, and I'm taking you along for the ride. Today's episode is about a rabbit hole that I discovered over lunch a few weeks ago while watching C-SPAN on my lunch break. You know, like all the cool kids do. Now, I was only half paying attention, but I ended up getting mesmerized by a hearing about a thing that I had never heard of before called FirstNet. And that 20 minutes over lunch was enough to get me obsessed, and so I downloaded the whole hearing, listened to it, and then collected all of the background information that we need to understand that FirstNet is a new government department charged with creating a high-speed wireless network specifically for emergency first responders. And so that's like police and firemen and ambulance drivers. You know, heroes who save our lives when shit gets real here at home. But like so many stories involving our government right now, when you start asking questions and searching for the answers, it turns out that the FirstNet story is far more complicated than a simple wireless network for an important group of people. FirstNet is a story about safety, yes, but it's also about corruption and monopolies and corporatism and even net neutrality. And so I'm excited to share this one with you today because it's just one of those under-the-radar stories about an issue that just isn't black and white. You know, this thing is nuanced. There's good news and there's concerning news, but it's all fascinating news, at least I think so. But you're listening to a podcast about Congress, and so I'm guessing that you're a nerd too, and I think you'll enjoy learning and contemplating this too. So let's start this story with the problem that FirstNet was created to solve. You see, public safety officials currently use thousands of separate mobile radios, like walkie-talkies, to communicate daily and during large pre-planned events like the Super Bowl or a concert, and during emergencies. Now, the problem is that the radio system often doesn't work with other radios and other technologies. And so, for example, a firefighter, if he's using an old handheld radio, can't talk to another firefighter across town who's using an iPhone. They're two different technologies. They're incompatible. But even when they're using the same technology, like radio to radio, greedy, selfish corporate decisions have put profit over public safety and have made devices incompatible. And I'm specifically talking about one company. That company is Motorola. Because in 2009, when the Obama stimulus set aside grant money for public safety equipment, more than 2/3 of the grants first awarded went to Motorola, which at the time, and it still might, I'm not sure, but at that time, Motorola had an 80% market share on emergency radios, which means that 4 out of 5 radios that emergency responders were using were made by Motorola. But one of the main reasons why Motorola was so dominant in the emergency radio market is not because their technology is the best, but it's because they resorted to shady tactics to keep its dominance over the public safety equipment. One of the things that it did was embed features on its equipment that would prevent Motorola equipment from interacting with non-Motorola equipment. So basically, Motorola made their equipment incompatible on purpose. And by doing this, Motorola prioritized its own profits over the public safety of us because it put state and local agencies in the position of having to either upgrade with only Motorola equipment to achieve that interoperability that's so important for our safety, or state and local agencies would have to junk their entire systems to switch to another vendor. But the point is that we have a problem in this country with our first responders not being able to effectively communicate with each other. And this has been going on a long time. The clip I'm about to play for you is from a hearing from 2005. This was on September 29th, 2005 to be exact, which is right after Hurricane Katrina. And this was a hearing in the House of Representatives, and the person you're going to hear is David Boyd, who at the time was the Homeland Security Department's SAFECOM program director.
Interoperability is not a new issue. It was a problem in Washington, D.C. when the Air Florida flight crashed into the Potomac in 1982, in New York City when the Twin Towers were first attacked in 1993, in 1995 when the Murrah Building was destroyed in Oklahoma City, and in 1999 at Columbine. Too many public safety personnel cannot communicate by radio because their equipment is still incompatible or the frequencies they are assigned to are different, and they haven't got bridging technologies available. They operate on 10 different frequency bands, and they run communication systems that are often proprietary and too often 30 or more years old. Over 90% of the nation's public safety wireless infrastructure is financed, owned, operated, and maintained by the more than 60,000 individual local jurisdictions, police, fire, and emergency services that serve the public.
Now, even though this has been going on clearly since before I was born, for a lot of us, the first time we had ever thought about first responder communication equipment was after 9/11. Now, this was fairly well known, but in case you don't know what happened, here's Timothy Romer. He was a member of the 9/11 Commission, and he was testifying at that 2005 hearing.
Let me give you a couple examples of what the 9/11 Commission found as to some of these problems. We found all kinds of compelling instances of bravery and courage, people going into burning buildings and rescuing people. They might have rescued more. We might have saved more of the fire department chiefs, officers, police officers, emergency personnel, if they would have had public radio spectrum to better communicate. At 9:59 in the morning on 9/11, 4 years ago, a general evacuation order was given firefighters in the North Tower. The South Tower had collapsed. A place that held up to 25,000 people had been diminished to cement, steel, and ash. The people then in the North Tower, many of the chiefs in the lobby didn't even know that the other tower had collapsed. Or else they might have been able to get more people out more quickly. We had comments from people saying such things as, we didn't know it had collapsed. Somebody actually said, Mr. Chairman, that people watching TV had more information than we did in the lobby on 9/11 in the North Tower. People on TV in Florida or California knew more than our first responders on site in New York City.
And two of the specific issues listed in the 9/11 Commission report as contributing factors to this failure included a reliance on commercial providers for equipment and communication networks, and an inability of those networks to prioritize public safety use over civilian and commercial use. And that makes perfect sense to me, because think about what you did on 9/11. Did it involve using a phone? Because I know, at least in my experience, it was a phone call from my roommate's mom that woke up Annie and I and caused us to turn on the TV. And I used my phone that day to coordinate meeting up with friends during lunch to go to church. And I used my phone that day to find out that my Aunt Lori, who we had reason to believe was flying from Boston to Los Angeles, was not on one of the World Trade Tower planes, thank God. But the point is that I was on the phone all damn day, because that's what we do on days like 9/11. And I was in Los Angeles. In New York and in Washington, D.C., people were frantically looking for their loved ones who were missing, or people were trying to find their way home, or it doesn't even matter. The point is that a lot of people were using the communications network, and it jammed. And the public safety officials were on that same network. And so when the radios didn't work, the phones didn't either. And the guys in the towers were competing with everyone in New York that just wanted to talk to their moms. And unfortunately, we didn't really learn that lesson very quick, because this continued to happen. You know, in 2010, during the World Cup, there were 70,000 people in Panther Stadium. And at some point in the game, something exciting happened. Goal! And everyone pulled out their cell phones to text or call or tweet or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever the hell to share that moment with their internet friends. But when that happened, the cell tower overloaded, and the police command center that was set up across from the stadium was kicked off the network. Now, if that were to happen again, say when an Ariana Grande concert is letting out, there could be major consequences for having the police and all of the Snapchatters competing for the same data network. And by 2012, 2 years later, during Hurricane Sandy, the situation had improved as police commanders were able to talk to firefighters as they battled power outages. But then when emergency officials from other cities arrived to help, their radios couldn't communicate with the public safety officials from New York. And so we've had so many examples in our recent history that it's obvious that we need to figure out a way to make it possible for emergency response personnel from anywhere in the country to be able to talk to other emergency response personnel. And the solution, it turns out, is in each of our pockets. Because in the last decade, cellular phones have morphed into computers that we all carry around with us all the time. And you're probably listening to me on one right now, and it's no different for police, firefighters, EMTs, and all of the other first responders. We all pretty much have these magic computers in our pockets, and we use them to communicate with each other. The technology has evolved on the device level, clearly, but we need it to evolve on the connection level. So enter FirstNet. FirstNet is the relatively new independent government agency that's in charge of creating and operating a new high-speed wireless data network that will connect all communication devices used by emergency responders in the United States. Here's a snippet from a What is FirstNet video posted on the FirstNet website.
First responders are on the front line of our safety and security. Lives depend on their ability to communicate. FirstNet is developing a wireless network just for them, to modernize their communications and keep them connected every day and during every emergency. FirstNet was born out of the 9/11 Commission recommendation to enhance communications used by fire, police, and EMS. This united the public safety community, which pushed for their own communications network. As a result of their advocacy, Congress created FirstNet as the focal point for the first nationwide public safety broadband network. The network will put advanced technologies, applications, and devices into the hands of first responders to help them save lives and protect communities.
FirstNet and its core mission of building a communications network for first responders became law as a part of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012. And I remember this bill, even though I hadn't started Congressional Dish yet, and you might too, because this was the law that was signed between Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2011 that did like 100 different things. And you might remember some of the talking pointy items that were included, like the payroll tax holiday or extension of unemployment insurance. And then the Republicans got some of Obamacare repealed and they renewed some tax cuts. You know, it was one of those smorgasbord bills that we always seem to get around the holidays. And so as a dingleberry on the smorgasbord, FirstNet was created with a network construction trust fund of $7 billion to be distributed in federal grants. Now, after this first $7 billion, revenue is expected to come from user fees paid by public safety first responders, and this is important, from shared profits from extra capacity that AT&T will sell in non-emergency times. And I say AT&T because AT&T was just given the contract to construct and maintain this new network for 25 years. It's this contract that prompted the hearing that you're going to hear clips from today. But back to the FirstNet system, states do not have a choice about participating. They have to participate, but they will have a choice about how they do it. And so one option is to opt in and allow AT&T to install and operate the system. Or if they don't like the AT&T plan, they can opt out and hire another contractor to build and maintain the network themselves. Now, if a state doesn't decide in time, FirstNet will consider that an automatic opt-in, and that gives AT&T the green light to proceed with its plan for that state. And there's a chart that I've included for you in the show notes that shows how the opt-in, opt-out process works. And there are hurdles that need to be jumped in order for the states to opt out. And if the state fails any of them, AT&T gets the green light to build their network. And so when I look at this, I see something that's been structured in a way, at least in my opinion, to offer the states the illusion of choice. Because the easiest choice here is clear. You opt in and give AT&T control of your first responder network. That's clearly what they're trying to encourage here. That said, though, it's also worth knowing that while FirstNet has to build a network in every state, and the states have to participate, no one has to use the network, whether it's built by AT&T or some other contractor, after it's up and running. And so public safety officials can choose not to use it, at least by law, maybe not in practice, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, so FirstNet it's one of those government agencies that was designed by corporate people, and so it's structured more corporate-like than government. And by that I mean that FirstNet is governed by a 15-member board of directors. Now, 3 of these seats automatically go to government officials. So one of them is Secretary of Homeland Security, which was John Kelly up until a few days ago, but John Kelly was just made Trump's chief of staff, and so we don't know who that person's going to be. Another seat goes to the U.S. Attorney General, which right now is former Senator Jeff Sessions. And then the 3rd seat automatically goes to the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, which is Mick Mulvaney, who is one of these people who believes strongly that the government can't do anything right and only the private sector has the answers. I mean, he's really extreme about it. So he gets a seat on this board. And then for the other 12 seats, the Commerce Secretary picks the rest. Now, most, if not all, of the current board members were picked by Obama's Commerce Secretary. But if any seats end up vacant, it's Trump's Commerce Secretary, who is a corporate raider nicknamed the King of Bankruptcy, Wilbur Ross, who's going to fill those empty seats. And the original board of directors was a hot, greedy mess, which includes 6 telecom executives, including the CEO. And these private sector guys, who in popular theory do everything better by their very nature, well, these wise private sector men wasted about $500 million by accomplishing nothing for years after hiring their old friends and coworkers and paying them huge salaries, calling those salaries market rate. So, for example, 35 private for-profit code word consultants were each paid market rates of approximately $350,000 a year of your tax money, which is almost as much as the President of the United States makes per year for his public service. So after that was discovered, the result was that 3 of the telecom guys resigned, and Obama's Commerce Secretary, who was then Penny Pritzker, I guess that's her name, I don't know, but Penny named more public safety officials to the board in 2014. And so now the telecom executives have only 3 seats. They only now control 1/5 of the board. And this new board full of public safety officials, well, they're getting shit done and they're doing it fast. And one of their recent accomplishments, like I said before, is that they've picked a contractor. Because FirstNet is responsible for making this new network a reality, but FirstNet has decided that the government will not be building it. And so last month, in July of 2017, AT&T was given a $6.5 billion contract. And so they've basically been given the rest of the $7 billion that wasn't wasted by the original board full of greed monsters. And AT&T is going to use that money to build the network. And so here's Chris Sambar, and you're going to hear from this guy a lot today. But he's the AT&T senior vice president in charge of the FirstNet project, and he's testifying in a Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Subcommittee on Communications hearing that took place on July 20th. And in this clip, he's going to explain the overall goal of what AT&T is going to do on behalf of FirstNet.
The vast majority, as we understand it based on our research and FirstNet's research, the vast majority of firefighters, for example, are not issued devices for their daily use at work, especially volunteer firefighters. Exactly. Greater than 70% of police officers are in the same situation. They are not provided a device. They're using their personal devices. We are going to make available the FirstNet network to all of those first responders, regardless of whether you're a volunteer, whether your agency provides you a device, or whether you bring your own personal device. They will have access to the FirstNet network. Once we can verify their credentials, ensure that we have the right people on the network, they will have access to all of those features and benefits, and it will come at a significantly lower price than they're paying today for their personal or commercial service. So it's a tremendous benefit to all first responders.
Now, for reasons that will become clear later, who knows if that cost thing is true? But the existence of the new network not only appears beneficial for first responders, but it could also be very beneficial for us. And just so you know where I'm coming from in this, and I've talked about this a few times in the thank yous, but I just moved into a new apartment and I love it, but it's dangerous here and I'm actually only more concerned about it since I moved in. And the reason I say that my building is dangerous is that the land this building is on is basically sand. And in a major earthquake, something awesome happens called liquefaction, which basically means that the seemingly hard dirt underneath the building will turn to quicksand. And when this happens, the building on top of the quicksand sometimes falls down, and I live in one of those buildings. And I'm no architect, but I've seen some things while being here that haven't made me feel any better. So like, for example, my toilet, actually my entire bathroom really, it leans a little to the right. And the columns that hold up the walkways have rusted bolts and they look like they were constructed in the 1970s because they were. And Joe fell on his ass the other day because one of the steps is completely misaligned. And, you know, my darling husband had also been crushing craft beers all day. But the point remains that this is an old building that's been settling for 40 years into the sand it's built on. It's getting a little wonky. And I think all the time about what happens if the big one hits while I'm living here. And so I was really excited to hear Chris Sambar list some of the possibilities for how this network could be used to save people like me if the building codes in this era of deregulation are as inadequate as I'm suspecting that they are.
Possibilities include near real-time information on traffic conditions, which can help determine the best route to an emergency for a first responder. Wearable sensors and cameras for police and firefighters to help give them better situational awareness, and camera-equipped drones and robots that will be able to deliver real-time imagery.
And Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii expanded on the possibilities too.
With FirstNet, firefighters will be able to download the blueprint of a burning building before they enter. A police officer arriving at a scene can run a background check or get pictures of a suspect by accessing a federal law enforcement database. Most importantly, emergency personnel will not be competing with commercial users for bandwidth. They will have priority on this network, which will be built and hardened to public safety specifications. It will have ruggedized and competitive devices and specify public safety applications.
And so you heard that with this new network, emergency personnel won't have to compete with commercial users anymore. And I'm really happy to tell you that this is going to become a reality really soon, because by the end of 2017, first responders will have a preemption authority, allowing them to bump residents and commercial users off of the upgraded AT&T network in emergencies. And so this is happening really fast. I mean, we're talking this is done by Christmas. AT&T will also be hardening their infrastructure, and I didn't know what the hell that meant. And so I was really thankful for this exchange between Senator Roger Vicker of Kansas and the witness, who was Dr. Damon Darcy of the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He's a professor there.
Dr. Darcy, let me mention that the Mississippi Wireless Communications Commission has expressed concerns about FirstNet's commitment to hardening the network. You mentioned this in your testimony, the need for FirstNet infrastructure to be hardened. Can you discuss why that's important, and is it more important in the rural areas? And also, in your experience, how do broadband needs differ between urban and rural communities with respect to providing emergency medical services?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, we had a tornado, as you well remember, that took out a hospital in the northeast part of our state. And the medical center has got a pretty robust program to respond to that, and we did. The challenge in that was it took out a couple of commercial towers, but it did not, after a fairly close hit, take out one of our hardened public safety communication towers. What that did for us is we lost all ability to communicate data out of that area, which was vital in moving and evacuating a hospital, a nursing home, and recovering the people that were there. That's the piece that is the concern that I think we share, all of us here, of how do we make that as hardened as possible. In terms of rural and urban, from a medical perspective, we can do a lot more, as our team is showing in Mississippi and other states, if we know about the patient well before they get close to a hospital. If we can reach out and touch the stroke patient in the middle of the Mississippi Delta, we can dramatically increase their chances of survival and meaningful use after arrival to the hospital. Currently, we're doing that over radio, and it's working really well. But now imagine that in the rural areas. In the urban areas, it's vital in the medical world, but here we're 5 minutes from multiple hospitals. Now take that as 45 or 50 minutes away. And what we can do with broadband data in that time is truly life-saving and saving of healthcare dollars. There's a nexus here that FirstNet can combine both of those.
Also, it appears that we've learned the Motorola lesson, because Senator Bill Nelson of Florida got this assurance from AT&T's Chris Sambar.
So you're going to have a level playing field for all device manufacturers?
Absolutely, sir.
And another cool thing about FirstNet is that the network is not going to just stop at the border, at least not at the border with their white neighbors to the north. Here's Michael Poth, the current CEO of FirstNet.
Canada is using the same exact spectrum that we will be utilizing with AT&T, so there's a lot of synergies. We spend a great deal of time coordinating and comparing notes with Canada and the public safety entities in that country as to what we're doing, so that there is the interoperability between the countries will also be realized.
So while we're building a wall between us and our friendly southern neighbors, we're creating an interoperable communication system with our neighbors to the north. So at least we're getting the whole be a good neighbor thing half right. But I digress. So let's see. So we know that this network is going to be built by AT&T, but who exactly gets to use it? Well, here's Chris Sambar again, the AT&T guy.
We initially envisioned, when we launched the state plan portal on June 19th, that we would have roughly 50 user IDs and passwords per state. That would be 50 individuals who would access the portal. We immediately got feedback that states wanted more, and we are offering more. So we have a state right now, as a matter of fact, 227 login and user IDs have been issued. So it shouldn't be an issue for a state if they have additional people. The only requirements we have, Senator, is that, as Mr. Post said, that it's an official email address, somebody in the state who works for the state, or an authorized consultant. Either of those is fine. We just don't want like at Gmail, at Hotmail, someone that we don't know who they are.
So what I got out of that answer is that to get access as a public safety official to the network, you have to work for the government or be a contractor. And that contractor thing kind of opens it up to a lot more people, but it also makes sense because, like, for example, I know that EMTs are often working for private companies now. So that makes sense to me. But also more importantly, what I learned here is that AT&T is the ultimate decider of who gets access. So AT&T decides who gets in. And they also decide what those people will be charged. And so here's Senator Roger Vicker wanting to know exactly how they're going to make that decision.
On user fees, will they cost the same for all network users, or will they vary by regions, public safety agencies, or states?
It's a difficult answer because there are different use cases. So it depends. If you're a large department and you want unlimited data, and you have a number of applications that you want pre-installed on the device, and you have mobile device management software, that would be one use case. There may be a rural department that wants to connect body cameras and dashboard video camera from a police department. It will depend on the use case.
So it's use case and not regions and states.
That's correct, sir.
That would be the variable.
That's correct.
So AT&T decides who gets to use the network, and AT&T decides how much that's going to cost the users. And it turns out that that's not all that AT&T gets to decide. So this is Mark Goldstein. He's the Government Accountability Office's Physical Infrastructure Issues Director, and he's referring to a report that was released last month regarding FirstNet and their contract with AT&T.
In March 2017, FirstNet awarded a 25-year contract to AT&T to build, operate, and maintain the network. FirstNet's oversight of AT&T's performance is very important given the scope of the network and the duration of the contract. Among GAO's findings in the report are the following. First, FirstNet has conducted key efforts to establish the network, namely releasing the request for proposal for the network and awarding the network contract to AT&T. As the contractor, AT&T will be responsible for the overall design, development, production, operation, and evolution of the network.
It's pretty clear that, well, this network is the government and FirstNet's responsibility, considering, FirstNet and the government are the same thing, but it's their responsibility. And yet it's AT&T that's going to do all the work and make the most important decisions, like who gets access, what it will cost, and where the infrastructure will go. That's kind of a lot of power over our public safety system to turn over to AT&T, a company that exists for profit. And so why did FirstNet decide to do it this way? Why did they pick AT&T? Well, here's Michael Poth, the FirstNet CEO, responding to questions from Senator Bill Nelson of Florida.
Numerous bids were in, and they were analyzed with a great level of detail, and through that process that the Department of Interior assisted us with as the acquisition experts, AT&T came out as the prevailing solution and prevailing company to provide those.
The question is why?
Well, the value that they're bringing with their existing infrastructure, their ability and size, their financial sustainability to be able to take on something of this nature, and their lowest risk approach to implementing this in the shortest time was truly some of the value propositions that made them more competitive than some of the other bids that were analyzed.
So AT&T was selected precisely because it's already so dominant. Their existing infrastructure is almost everywhere, and that would allow this to be done quick. And then AT&T also sweetened the deal. So here's Chris Sambar, the AT&T vice president in charge of the FirstNet project. And in here, he's going to refer to Band Class 14, which is essentially the name of the spectrum or the network that is going to be, at least in theory, specifically for the public safety officials.
The initial RFP that FirstNet released contemplated building out a public safety broadband network using just Band Class 14, and we responded accordingly. But through discussions, we decided we would extend it beyond just the Band Class 14, which is the spectrum that was allocated for first responders in 2012. We said we would open up all of the spectrum bands within AT&T. So essentially what that means is the day that a state opts in, they have immediate access to AT&T's entire network, all spectrum bands, and they will see the benefits of FirstNet on all spectrum bands all wireless towers from AT&T that are LTE enabled. So I think that's a tremendous benefit that FirstNet was not expecting when they contemplated the original RFP, but when we brought that, I think they were very pleased with that, and that helped us.
And from the perspective of someone who is convinced that she has an above average chance of death or serious injury in a large earthquake that could happen at literally any moment, this is an important factor. You know, it would take a long time for our government to build a network that AT&T already has. There's no doubt that paying AT&T and using their network does speed this process up, and by a lot. And so from that perspective, despite all of the concerns I'm about to lay on you, I'm genuinely happy to know that the federal government has come up with and is implementing a plan that will, in a very real way, improve our safety here at home. Because, you know, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year on a military that's stationed in, 150 countries the last time I checked. And yet the biggest threat to me is the earth shaking while I'm on my right-leaning toilet. And this $7 billion, well, this is far more likely to help save my ass than any of that war-fighting money being used to try and overthrow Syria and to force an economic system upon a world that doesn't want it. You know, think about your lives. Where do you spend most of your time? What's most likely to get you? Is it a tornado or a hurricane or a fire? How about a car accident or your own drunken foolery? You know, I like seeing investments in public safety here where we are. And I feel like I'm getting a return on my tax investment when I see it spent this way. And so overall, the bottom line is that building this network, that's a good thing. And when I look at this, I feel like government is doing something right by me, and I'm happy about it. But that said, I have concerns about how it's going to be done via AT&T. Because AT&T is going to be doing a lot. You know, here's a long clip from Chris Sambar, and we're going to listen to this once, and then I'm going to break this down.
The AT&T team that I lead is dedicated exclusively to FirstNet. I expect this group to grow to several hundred employees by this year's end, as we hire people across the country with a broad range of skill sets to help us ramp up our network build-out. Overall, AT&T expects to spend $40 billion over the lifetime of this contract and to build and operate a unique nationwide interoperable IP-based high-speed mobile network encrypted at its core that will provide first responders priority, primary users with preemption, and all other users during times of emergency and network congestion. The first responder network will be connected to and leverage off AT&T's world-class telecommunications platform, valued at nearly $180 billion, including a wireless network that reaches 99.6% of the U.S. population. In addition, AT&T will support first responders 24/7 by 365 with a dedicated security operations center and help desk. We will provide first responders with a highly secure application ecosystem, as well as a highly competitive, flexible pricing on equipment and services that they select for their unique needs. One of the most important resources that AT&T brings to bear on the new first responder network is our best-in-class national disaster recovery team. We have spent more than 130,000 working hours on field exercises and disaster recovery deployments over the last 2 decades. This team combines network infrastructure, support trailers, recovery engineering software applications, and boots on the ground filled by full-time and volunteer AT&T disaster response team members. In order to support the first responder network, AT&T will increase its disaster recovery fleet by adding 72 new custom-designed vehicles just for the FirstNet mission.
Okay, so first Sambar said,
AT&T expects to spend $40 billion over the lifetime of this contract.
But AT&T is only getting $6.5 billion in tax money. And so that doesn't add up, which made me wonder, how else is AT&T getting paid in all this? Because AT&T is not doing this to make America great or whatever. AT&T is a multinational corporation. It operates in 120 countries and it is not loyal to the USA. And it operates for profit. AT&T has shareholders all over the world who are people who place bets on AT&T through the Wall Street casino. And AT&T's mission is to give those shareholders as much money to put back in their bank accounts as possible. The government exists to ensure public safety. AT&T exists for profit. And a business run for profit doesn't accept $6.5 billion for something that's going to cost them $40 billion. And so what's up? Well, the answer came from another handy-dandy chart that I've included for you in the show notes that shows how AT&T will profit from the new network. And what the chart and the GAO report says is that the United States is estimating that approximately 14.6 million public safety officials will use the FirstNet system, which means that 14.6 million Americans who need to use this network will need to be AT&T customers. There is no other choice. AT&T will have, in effect, a legal monopoly over those 14.6 million American customers. And it's AT&T that's going to determine how much they'll be charged. Now, the basics of profit says in order to get as much as possible, you charge as much as you can without pissing off the customer, causing them to get that product elsewhere. But like I just said, that's not possible for these Americans, so AT&T basically has them by the balls. And because AT&T has an inherent profit motive, their goal is not to make this as affordable as possible. It's to make it affordable enough that the contract doesn't get pulled. So basically, AT&T can charge whatever they can get away with. Now, I'm not entirely sure that there are no price controls in the FirstNet AT&T contract for reasons that will be crystal clear in a minute. But if AT&T had agreed to that, I'm sure that would have been bragged about to the senators. But you heard it yourself. AT&T told the Senate that questions about user fees are tough to answer at this time. And so we simply just don't know if they'll take advantage of their 25-year guaranteed legal monopoly over a critical piece of our public safety infrastructure and charge more than they need to. But if I were a shareholder looking out for my own bank account above all else, you know, the new American way, well, I'd want AT&T to do just that. So the legal monopoly they'll have over the plans of public safety officials, that's one profit stream. The other one, with even higher earning potential, is that AT&T is also going to be able to sell access to the new public safety fast network to non-public safety officials during non-emergencies, which is most of the time. And the GAO report said clearly that, quote, AT&T may retain revenue from both the public safety and commercial users, unquote. Now, first of all, this is not what's being advertised to the U.S. public. That YouTube video on FirstNet's website said,
First responders are on the front line of our safety and security. Lives depend on their ability to communicate. FirstNet is developing a wireless network just for them.
Just for them! But this isn't just for them. The vast majority of the time, it will be used by them and whoever else is willing to pay AT&T to access it. And in the hearing, as I was watching it, and when I saw that ad in my first "What is FirstNet" search, I was under the assumption that the new network was only for public safety officials. And I don't think I was being a dum-dum in that assumption. But that's clearly not the case, which was only made clear after I read the GAO report. That's further down the rabbit hole than the average person is going to go. And what this really appears to be, now that I know that, is this appears to be a taxpayer-subsidized upgrade to a private corporation's private infrastructure, and we simply get a kill switch for public safety officials. That's not how this is being sold to the public, when it's being discussed at all. And also, now, forgive my ignorance here, because I'm not into techie shit, and I really don't understand the nuances, and certainly not the technology of the net neutrality debate. But wasn't the whole fear that the giant telecoms, like, for example, AT&T, were going to establish fast lanes and slow lanes of internet access? Like a fast lane for public safety officials and anyone with the ability to pay, and a slow lane for everyone else? Is that not exactly what this is? Or do I have that completely confused? Also, on top of that, Chris Sambar mentioned that
AT&T will increase its disaster recovery fleet by adding 72 new custom-designed vehicles just for the FirstNet mission.
And what he's referring to are things called deployables. And these things are actually pretty cool, as they're like mini cell towers that can be moved to wherever they're needed. And Michael Poth, the FirstNet CEO, is pretty stoked on them.
AT&T's already been doing this, as mentioned, for years with their fleet of 700 deployables, now with the 72 dedicated, which are much smaller units, which is going to give us the ability to maybe get those into areas that are a little tougher to get to. We're very excited about that. That is an absolute addition to the solution that we're going to be able to bring to public safety quickly.
And I think these things are cool too. There's nothing wrong with deployables. But is anyone stopping to think about how central to our emergency management system we want to make AT&T? I mean, AT&T is the not-so-new network, apparently, and AT&T will own all of the equipment and now all of the equipment to fix it. And so if the government wants or needs to act, it needs to go through AT&T. And then when you think of like when the emergency is happening, like during the emergencies, how much will the government be charged for AT&T's emergency services, since it'll be physically impossible for the government to do these repairs in-house? And it's not just an emergency thing, because not only will AT&T have control over the deployables in those emergencies at the most critical times, but AT&T is going to decide where all of the permanent infrastructure goes too. Not local government, not the states, not FirstNet. AT&T makes those decisions. And I know this because of this exchange between AT&T guy Chris Sambar and Senator Roger Wicker. Or Wicker. I don't know how the fuck to say his name.
So we will be building out band class 14 over the coming 5 years across a significant portion of our network. In the meantime, before band class 14 is built out, we will be using our commercial network. There are requirements in the contract with FirstNet over how quickly we need to build out band class 14. We have to hit those milestones in order to receive the payments due to us from FirstNet. If we don't hit those milestones, we don't receive the payments. So we will be aggressively building out band class 14 for first responders. Again, in the meantime, they will have access to all of AT&T's bands. So, to say it simply, if you are a first responder, Senator, you will not know whether you're on band class 14 or any other AT&T band, but you will have the exact same experience regardless of what band you're on AT&T's network.
Your position is that the service is provided and the consumer and the public safety user, to them it will be immaterial where it's coming from.
The way I like to say exactly, the way I say it is this. Public safety has been told for many years that the magic of FirstNet happens on band class 14. And we've changed that. That's not correct anymore. The magic happens on the AT&T network, period. And it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to have the exact same experience. So we've extended it far beyond the band class 14 to our entire network.
Will you build out the class 14 spectrum only where it is economically viable, or will you build it out where there is a written requirement in the arrangement between you and FirstNet?
We are building band class 14 where we need the capacity in our network. So in order to provide priority and preemptive services to first responders and have enough capacity for everyone that's on the network, including the first responders, there are places where we will need additional capacity. That's where we're building
that need.
AT&T, based on capacity triggers. Obviously, we've been doing this for a long time. Based on capacity triggers that we see in the network, we build out band class 14 as additional capacity on individual, and this is done at a tower-by-tower basis.
I just looked it up. His name's Roger Wicker. I've been saying it wrong the whole time. But anyway, back to FirstNet and AT&T. What I'm learning here is that this is not a new network that we're building, even though that's what we're being told. It's an expansion of AT&T's network. We will have no network at the end of this. AT&T's network is our network. Our network is AT&T. And so if this contract doesn't work out, how do we ever disconnect this? Does this make AT&T too big to fail now? We can't lose our entire public safety communication system if AT&T loses in the free market, which this looks pretty damn rigged to me. Because if AT&T loses, we lose. And how can the government possibly let the free market decide to let AT&T and our public safety communication system fail? And it's not like this is the only part of our government that AT&T is entangled in. AT&T recently assured their shareholders that they have plenty of our tax money coming into their company, and they gave some examples. Turns out that AT&T is getting money from NASA to research drone traffic management systems, and NASA is also paying AT&T to connect giant radio antennas around the whole world, which are parts of NASA's deep space network that allows communications with our spacecraft missions. The U.S. military is also paying AT&T. One of the projects they're working on is they're testing a program at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, where AT&T sensors are being installed to monitor the perimeter, the gates, and the facility. So basically, AT&T is part of the security system for our military bases. And then AT&T is also starting work on redesigning the entire software network used by the Defense Information Systems Agency. That's some pretty important stuff. So AT&T is now becoming more and more an important part of our government. And we all know how big it is in the commercial sector. And the thing that we have to remember is that, AT&T has a history of getting so big that the government has had to intervene. There has been times in not too distant of our history where the government has had to enforce rules upon AT&T, which is only possible because AT&T didn't have our government by the balls. And for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, AT&T, or the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, began in 1885 as a subsidiary of Bell Telephone, as in Alexander Graham Bell, the dude who invented the damn thing. AT&T was created to build and operate a long-distance telephone network, much like they're being hired by the government to build and operate a tiered wireless network today. And by 1913, AT&T had become a government-approved monopoly. Sounds familiar, huh? But promised to allow independent phone companies to connect to its network, just like how it's promising to allow non-AT&T devices to connect to its network today. But over the years, AT&T got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they did all kinds of things to stifle competition. And so in 1982, the year I was born, the government filed an antitrust lawsuit against AT&T, saying that AT&T and all of the companies it owned conspired to keep other companies from interconnecting with its long-distance network, which you'll remember they promised they would allow. Their refusal to allow other companies to access the long-distance network they built using their legal monopoly power caused 82% of all telephone business and 90% of the long-distance business to belong in some way to AT&T. Now, AT&T eventually settled that lawsuit and agreed to give up the 22 companies it had providing local telephone service. AT&T kept its long-distance telephone network and equipment manufacturing business and spun off the rest. Importantly, however, in return for giving up those 22 local phone companies, AT&T was then allowed by the government into unregulated businesses that AT&T was previously prohibited from entering, including communications between computers. And that's the internet, folks. And then just 10 years later, after the dust settled and the media spotlight turned away, AT&T started putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, with the help of the deregulators in Congress and the Clinton administration. Now, the pieces change names, and I'll spare you the convoluted play-by-play, but there's a beautiful chart that I've included in the show notes for you that shows how almost all of the pieces of the former AT&T eventually came right back to being AT&T, either by being bought or through mergers. And on top of that, AT&T picked up some new ones. In 1991, AT&T bought an unwilling computer manufacturer as AT&T wanted its line of computers capable of linking to other computers and software made by other manufacturers. In 1994, AT&T bought a cellular company and began a race to build a national wireless network. And then in 1996, the communications industry was deregulated when President Clinton proudly signed the Telecommunications Act. At the time, the New York Times reported that the deregulation, aka tearing up of laws, would, quote, unleash a wave of mergers and acquisitions, unquote, which it did. But the New York Times also said that eventually, quote, it would knock down traditional monopolies in local telephone service and cable television, unquote. And I just want to put it out there that in this new building I'm living in, I have one option for landline telephone service and cable, and that is Comcast. So major fucking fail with the deregulation solving our monopoly problems, because whatever competition was created in the short term is long gone now. But anyway, immediately after the national telecommunications laws got thrown in the trash, AT&T bought the nation's second largest cable company. And flash forward to more recently, in 2015, AT&T bought DirecTV, which gave them a satellite television company. And so now, here we are in 2017, and AT&T provides landline telephone services, cell phone service, cable television, satellite television, and internet service, both in the home and over their huge wireless network. And now, as in right now, as I speak, AT&T is in the process of buying Time Warner, which will expand AT&T's cable and internet dominance, but will also allow them to own stations, including HBO and CNN. And so in the next few months, when this deal is complete, AT&T will also become a content producer, like how Comcast produces everything made by Universal now. And they will distribute that content via their wireless phones, cable subscriptions, and internet connections. And now we're using our taxes to upgrade AT&T's wireless network to make them not only dominant in the commercial sector, but now essential for the government to function too. I mean, I don't know the dictionary definition of the word corporatism, but when I think of corporatism, you know, the merging of government and for-profit corporations, I mean, isn't this it? And it would be one thing if the government and AT&T were true partners, if they were equals with full transparency, and if the public had full knowledge of what the relationship entailed. But that's not the case here, because our state governments, which really are being pushed into the FirstNet AT&T system, our state governments do not have access to the underlying contract between AT&T and FirstNet, and therefore, neither do you and I. And this is one of the reasons why I can't and won't give you any conclusions on this today, because I still have so many questions that I can't answer because I can't see the deal that my government made with AT&T. And the hearing made it very clear that there are things about this contract that we, as in all Americans, including Congress, will not be told by AT&T about what they consider their network. Check out this exchange between Senator Roger Wicker and AT&T's Chris Sambar. But before you hear this, I want to be clear that the question that Wicker asks is not the important thing here. He actually gets the answer that he's looking for eventually, or at least sort of does. But it's the fact that Sambar answered like this at all that... just listen.
Are you able to say what approximate percentage of the lower 48 landmass will be covered by Band Class 14 build-out?
Unfortunately, I'm not, Senator. It's that's proprietary between FirstNet and AT&T. I would say again, it's a significant portion, though.
Can you be more specific than significant?
That would be proprietary, Senator. I apologize.
And what makes it proprietary?
The specific details of the contract between FirstNet and AT&T. There's a number of specific details that are proprietary, Senator.
That is proprietary and not available to the public.
That's correct, Senator.
Or to the Congress.
That's correct, Senator.
Tell me you did not just say that.
Oh, no, you didn't.
Oh, hell no.
You know, I can understand keeping some information from the public, but there is nothing about a contract between a government agency and anyone that should be kept from a United States senator. This is a network that is supposedly being built for the safety of United States citizens, and there is no question, especially not one as basic as how many of us will be covered, that in any way should be kept secret. And this is one of the most high-ranking government officials in this country. You know, if he has a question about any specific detail in a government contract, he should be able to get that answer. No proprietary anything. And if AT&T doesn't like it, they should get the out of business with my government. But was that Senator Roger Wicker's reaction? No. He's one of those who's like, we trust the private sector. They are always better and good. And so instead of ripping this AT&T guy a new asshole, which would have been the proper reaction, he shifted his question so that AT&T's stooge might be more willing to answer.
Then in terms of this coverage, which you said really shouldn't matter what band it's coming over, are you able to say what percentage of the lower 48 landmass will be covered in one way or the other?
One way or the other?
Yes. Apart, of course, from the deployables.
So 99.6% of the U.S. population will be covered by AT&T's network.
And since we did, sort of, get an answer to Wicker's question about coverage, let's take a closer look at that answer for a second, shall we? Because earlier in the hearing, Chris Sambar was talking about AT&T's current wireless network and how much of the population it serves, and he said this.
The first responder network will be connected to and leverage off AT&T's world-class telecommunications platform, valued at nearly $180 billion, including a wireless network that reaches 99.6% of the U.S. population.
But when Senator Wicker asked how much of the U.S. population will be served after the FirstNet network is done, AT&T's Chris Sambar said,
So 99.6% of the U.S. population will be covered by AT&T's network.
So 99.6% of us are covered by AT&T now, and 99.6% of us will be covered by AT&T after. That does not sound like a true expansion to me. And when you look at those numbers as human beings instead of percentages, human beings who might need police or firemen or, access to the public safety network, well, there's a lot of us that are currently outside of AT&T's network and would remain so when they become our public safety network because they don't seem to be planning on turning that 99.6% into 100%. And so when you do that math, when you look at the 0.4%, which is the percent of us left out of AT&T's network, well, 0.4% of 323 million Americans is 1.3 million Americans left outside of the network. That's about the size of San Diego, or for you red staters, Dallas, Texas. That's a lot of people that won't be covered by our national public safety network. And it's probably because, unlike the cities of San Diego or Dallas, these particular 1.3 million Americans are those that live in the boonies, and in order to cover them, AT&T would have to build infrastructure in places with few customers, which is not profitable. Again, AT&T exists for profit, not public safety. And in the GAO report, it clearly says that states are concerned that AT&T will not extend coverage to rural areas. And I share that concern. And it's not like this whole AT&T thing is going to be a short-term experiment. This is a 25-year contract. A 25-year contract that guarantees that AT&T will be a critical part of our government's public safety infrastructure for literally a generation. You know, a child that's being conceived right now. Well, you listen to my voice. Ew, stop. Don't conceive humans while listening to my voice, please. But a child that you conceive after listening to Congressional Dish will have graduated college, and AT&T will still be our national emergency communications network. That's a long fucking time. And so what happens if AT&T does all the things that I'm afraid of while we're locked into a 25-year contract with them? What if AT&T refuses to build in unprofitable rural areas? What if AT&T charges high rates to public safety officials that have no other coverage options? What if AT&T mismanages their finances and needs a government bailout, or else our public safety system shuts down? You know, how will AT&T be policed by the government if it's basically a part of government now? Well, here's Michael Poth of FirstNet trying to answer that question.
How do the states hold us accountable? As FirstNet shifts gears from developing a proposal and making an award, for the next 25 years, we are going to be in a position to work with the states, continuous and public safety in all of those states, to make sure that all of their expectations, both from the state plans and in the future, are being met and translated, if appropriately, back into contractual actionable items. Or if AT&T, for example, is not meeting the requirements or the expectations, FirstNet will, on behalf of public safety and those states, enforce the terms of the contract.
So if states have a problem with how AT&T is implementing the public safety network, they have to go to FirstNet as...
FirstNet will, on behalf of public safety and those states, enforce the terms of the contract.
So FirstNet polices AT&T using our legal system. Gotcha. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, if the state and local government and the public safety officers in them have a problem with the way that AT&T is designing or operating the network, states would have to convince FirstNet to police AT&T. But if FirstNet is the way the states can police AT&T, well, what if FirstNet, which, remember, was designed by a bunch of shady telecom executives and is currently governed by corporate raider Wilbur Ross and government-hating Mick Mulvaney and 3 telecom executives, you know, what happens if FirstNet just doesn't police AT&T? Who polices FirstNet? Who makes sure that FirstNet is making sure that AT&T is making decisions based on public safety instead of their own profits? Well, this is where the real government would kick in, because that would be the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. That's who would police FirstNet. But who makes sure that the NTIA, where, by the way, the top 2 offices are currently held by no one, yes, that's right, they're vacant, well, who would make sure that the unstaffed NTIA makes sure that FirstNet is making sure that AT&T is making decisions based on public safety instead of their own profits? Well, the next policeman up the ladder would be the Department of Commerce, which is part of the executive branch. But who would make sure that the Commerce Department, which, like I said earlier, is currently headed by Wilbur Ross, the FirstNet board member / billionaire 24-year employee of the Rothschild family, who helped Trump keep the casinos he bankrupted, and who is known as the king of bankruptcy for his oh-so-profitable habit of buying companies and destroying them for literally billions of dollars in profit? Well, who would make sure that that guy in the executive branch is making sure that the unstaffed NTIA makes sure that FirstNet is making sure that AT&T is making decisions based on public safety instead of their own profits? Well, that would be the president, President Donald Trump. And so ultimately, after going 5 wobbly steps up the accountability ladder, the states would have to depend on the walking, talking, usually lying multinational corporation in a human body known as President Donald Trump to enforce the AT&T contract. See why I'm concerned? You know, I just can't help but see this as a privatization of emergency management. And I'm not saying that I've concluded that this is bad or dangerous. I mean, I honestly don't know, because like I said before, I do want the system. I want it operating as soon as possible because, you know, the big one's coming, and AT&T does have the infrastructure already. And so I get why this plan makes sense, but then I look at it from the other side, and AT&T is a former monopoly power with monopoly aspirations that's merging with our government, and the accountability ladder is weak at best, and, you know, I don't know how to process this. And then there's this other thing that I just can't get out of my head. This is from the 2005 hearing that took place a few days after Hurricane Katrina. This is Art Botterell, who was an emergency information consultant.
Third, we can no longer afford to rely on vendor-driven design of our emergency communications infrastructure. Businesses are responsible for maximizing shareholder value, not for protecting the public welfare. We need independent sources of information and planning for our future emergency infrastructure, lest we continue to get updated versions of the same old thing.
And that's exactly what we're doing. AT&T is doing everything. All the planning, and they're hiding information. I'm so uncomfortable with that, and yet, the big one! I want to live! So, I'm so torn on this one. I have no conclusions. But I do know that this isn't a conversation that we're having in this country. Most people don't know that this is happening. This decision to integrate AT&T into our emergency response infrastructure is being made for us, and largely without our knowledge. Although that's not the government's fault. I saw this on C-SPAN. It's not being kept secret. If I'm going to blame anyone, I'm going to blame our Russia and Trump-obsessed media, but still, this is so far under the radar that it's basically swimming. And so I'm recording this on August 3rd, 2017, and this is where we're at as of today. So plans were distributed by FirstNet and AT&T to each state's governor in mid-June, and now the states and territories have until mid-December to make their final decision on opting in or opting out. And the states that opt out will have until mid-March to submit their own plan and will have to pay for at least 20% of the cost. Now, as of today, 8 states and 1 territory have officially opted in, and those states and territory are Arkansas, Iowa, Kentucky, Virginia, Wyoming, New Jersey, West Virginia, New Mexico, and the Virgin Islands. And the following clip is Curtis Brown. He's the Virginia Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, and he's giving us the state's reason for opting in.
Last week, the governor was proud to announce that Virginia was the first state in the nation to opt into FirstNet. Virginia opted in to provide current AT&T public safety subscribers with the benefit of priority services now at no cost to the Commonwealth, as well as to greenlight the build-out of Virginia's portion of the National Public Safety Broadband Network. We believe that the decision to opt in will promote competition within the public safety communications marketplace that will reduce costs and drive innovation across all carriers. Opting out was thoroughly considered, but the unknown cost and risks associated with deploying and operating the network was not feasible.
And he expanded on that after this question posed by Senator Bill Nelson of Florida.
There must have been some folks in Virginia that suggested that you opt out of the network and chart your own path. Tell me the benefits to Virginia's first responders of the governor's decision to opt in.
Thank you, Senator. The decision to opt in was really based on looking at the benefits that comes with opt-in, the immediate priority and preemption services that would come for those who are subscribers to the network. And a major thing, Senator, is the fact that it comes at no cost to the Commonwealth. We have been disproportionately impacted by sequestration and other aspects. The governor had to close a $300 million budget deficit. And so looking at the cost that would take to build a network and sustain it, it just was not feasible.
These states are cash strapped. And so when you look at this, it's like, oh, AT&T will do it for free. You just got to let them hold you by the balls. That's looking pretty attractive to these people that are trying to make budgets work. And remember, they don't have the option to not participate in this system. They either find a way in their own budget to make it themselves, or they just let AT&T do it on behalf of the federal government. So, you can understand the decision. That said, though, there are some states that have put out requests for proposals to build their own networks. And right now, those states, at least that we know of, are Alabama, Arizona, California, Colorado, Massachusetts, Michigan, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, and then New Hampshire has actually already selected a group of contractors to be their providers. They made that selection in 2016. So right now, it does appear that we do have one official opt-out. But then the rest of the states, I don't know what they're planning to do. But you do have time to call your state representatives if you have opinions to share about any of this. And there was one thing that I did hear in the hearing that I thought was a genius move on the part of some of the states, and that was this request that they're making of AT&T. Here's Chris Sambar.
So we have had a number of states as well as federal agencies we've been in communication with, and some of the states have been very direct that they're interested in us putting our or LTE equipment on state, city, municipal-owned assets. That would give them the benefit of revenue from AT&T through a lease agreement. It would also give us the benefit of being able to build out the network faster.
Which I love because it means that the infrastructure will be owned by the taxpayers, and that allows the locations that negotiate for this to easily switch to another vendor if AT&T sucks, for lack of a better word. It also gives a revenue stream to your local government, and local governments need as much money as they can get right now, since the obvious trend at the federal level with its current Republican Party control is to shift as many domestic programs over to the states and local governments as possible. And so that's one specific suggestion that you might make to your state for how to handle their FirstNet or opt-out negotiations. But the bottom line in all of this was summed up pretty nicely in the hearing by FirstNet CEO Michael Poth.
None of this could be possible, though, without the public-private framework that Congress established for the FirstNet network. By leveraging private sector resources, infrastructure, cost savings, public-private partner synergies to deploy, operate, and maintain the system, FirstNet can be now deployed quickly, efficiently, and cost-effectively.
Private-public partnership. I think this is not the last time we're going to see one of these, but this will be one to watch to see how it works out. Because this ball is rolling. There's no stopping it now. Not that I want to. I mean, it's a good thing with serious corporatism risks. And like I said, I don't know what to make of this. I can see it both ways, but it is happening. That much I know. And now you know too. All right, so let's see. I actually have a lot to tell you guys today. So as many of you know, Podcast Movement is coming up. It's going to be at the end of August, and this is the biggest podcasting convention that happens every year. This is the 4th year that it's happening. It's also where the Academy of Podcasters Awards are, and I'm speaking again this year. And if you haven't gotten your ticket yet, if you're a podcaster, an aspiring podcaster, or someone who wants to work with podcasters, because, you know, this industry is just growing and growing and growing, and there's a lot of support positions that we need, you know, because like I can tell you for this podcast, I don't do it alone. I have someone that does the artwork. That's Brian. He owns Only Child Imaginations. I have my sister right now does the show notes, but there are companies out there that do show notes and stuff for other podcasts, and you can be, you know, one of those people. I also have a audio editor, Pro Podcast Solutions, and of course I have Interview Connections, which are my agents who help me get on other podcasts. And so there's a whole support industry in podcasting that you can get into. And I'm telling you, Podcast Movement is where you need to go if you want to get into any of this. That's where you meet everybody, and that's how you get your foot in the door. And so that's coming up August 23rd through 25th in Anaheim. And if you haven't yet bought your ticket, you can use the code JenniferBriney50 and get $50 off of your registration. Now, when I get to Podcast Movement, if this is your first time, you should come to the newbie orientation because I'm going to be co-hosting that on Tuesday, August 22nd. And then we'll be hitting up a happy hour nearby, and everyone's welcome to join me in that. It's totally informal. It's not an official part of Podcast Movement, but we're making it happen anyway. So new people, make sure you're there for Tuesday, August 22nd, so that when the convention actually starts, you'll know what's going on and where to be, and you won't waste any time being lost and, and confused. And then the conference itself is Wednesday, August 23rd through the 25th. But it's Wednesday night. That's when the Academy of Podcasters Awards is taking place. And I'm so thrilled that Congressional Dish is nominated again in the news and politics category. And it's just, I look at the other podcasts that are in there, you know, like Tan Carlin and Embedded won last year, and Pod Save America, and there's NPR shows in there. I mean, these are the heavy hitters, and it's just such an honor to be listed alongside them. And I'm fully expecting to lose, but you know, a 10% chance of winning is better than nothing, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to be at the awards ceremony. And then at the after party, I told you guys this in one of the previous episodes, but Patreon is going to feature Congressional Dish, which means that I'm going to have my own table with some fun crap to give away. So for instance, I will have stress balls in the shape of the Capitol Dome and also some beer bottle koozies, since this will be happening at a bar. So very practical and much needed items. So yeah, if you're going to be at the after party, please stop by and say hello. And the reason that Patreon it's not necessarily sponsoring Congressional Dish, but featuring Congressional Dish, is because this is a listener-supported podcast, which means that you are its funding model. It's a value for value. So if the work that I've already done is something that you value and you got something from, the reason it's advertising free is because people are contributing whatever they think is fair on whatever platform they want to use. And right now you can use Patreon, you can use PayPal, you can send paper checks. I do accept Bitcoin. And then also you can enter Amazon every time you shop through congressionaldish.com, and everything you put in your cart, Congressional Dish gets a commission. So that's really easy too. But yeah, Patreon, they're being really cool to those of us that use their platform at the Academy of Podcasters Awards. And then on top of, featuring us at the after party, Patreon also sent me an email this week and said that they want to feature Congressional Dish in an article that they're writing. But this is where you come in. We all need your help. And so for those of you who haven't supported the podcast financially and never will, I know that you exist. This is the way that you can support the podcast and get a smidgen of good karma. Because what Patreon is also doing is that what they're trying to do is they want to feature your favorite episode. But the problem is they don't know what your favorite episode is, and neither do I. And so what I'm asking you to do today to support the podcast is to use a new directory, which I have to say is pretty cool. It's called Podchaser, and use that to vote for your favorite Congressional Dish episode. And then please share that episode with 3 of your friends, or 3 of your family members, or 3 of your coworkers, or 3 strangers. I don't care. Please share your favorite Congressional Dish episode with 3 human beings. And let's get some more people aware that this little podcast exists. But for the voting thing, this Podchaser thing is still in beta. And so you're going to need a password. The password is Patreon with a capital P. And I'll have all this information for you in this episode's introduction. So if you are listening to this on the free Congressional Dish app, just look in the description of the episode and you'll find it right there. Same with iTunes. And you don't even have to go to this episode's show notes. You can just go to congressionaldish.com to find this information. But the key is that this has to be done quickly. The article is scheduled to be released on August 20th. So please do this as fast as possible. In fact, do it right now. Go ahead. Press pause. I'll be right here when you get back. Hello again. See, it's so easy to support Congressional Dish. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And for, you superstars who do want to support the podcast financially, because, you're my employer and I just gave you another episode. If you find value in that, please visit the support page on congressionaldish.com for all of your options, whether you choose paper checks, PayPal, Bitcoin, and of course, Patreon. You can find all the links to all the information you need on the support page on congressionaldish.com. And so if you have helped Congressional Dish, thank you. I could not do this without you. And now I'd like to thank some specific people who paid for the last episode, which was about the other healthcare bills moving through Congress that no one is talking about. Oh, and I should probably update you on what happened in Congress with the big, repeal and replace saga. And this was covered pretty widely by the mainstream media. And so I'm pretty sure you guys are aware that votes did happen on 3 versions of repeal and replace. And short story, those votes failed. But what I think you need to know is that everything I said in the last episode still remains, that none of those bills are actually dead. And the reason is those weren't, I know this is complicated and wonky, but those weren't votes on the actual bills. What they were doing is they were introducing each of those bills as an amendment. And so as far as the bills are concerned, they haven't been voted down, even though votes did take place. And so everything I said is still true. That repeal and replace effort could come up again if we allow it to. And because none of this is over until the votes are actually taken, which they haven't been, or until this Congress is over. And that doesn't happen until January of 2019. And so just know that repeal and replace, it's stalled, that's for sure, but it's not over. So if you have emotions about that, it's still worth calling your senators and your congressmen every once in a while and just be like, oh, by the way, still hate this thing. So, but yeah, I want to thank the people who are supporting this podcast, because like I said, it would not exist still if it weren't for you. And I'm going to start first with Patreon. And this is a little awkward because I just told you that they're featuring Congressional Dish at Podcast Movement and they're giving me a table and now they're going to write an article and it feels a little weird to right now air their dirty laundry, but but their dirty laundry is affecting Congressional Dish and it's affecting, the value for value funding model, which we're really creating as we go with the guidance of John and Adam of No Agenda. Of course, they are the masters. But this week, I got a message from Josh, who's one of our Patreon supporters. And this is what Josh said. He said, I regret to inform you that I'm withdrawing my support for the Patreon platform. With the removal of Lauren Southern's Patreon, this platform has become a partisan political organization I cannot support. I believe strongly in speech for all, even those of which I disagree with. I urge you to pass these frustrations along through any channels that might be available. Please let me know if there are alternative methods to support your work, PayPal, etc. I strongly value your work, but I value free speech more. Thanks and good luck, Josh. And he did pull his Patreon funding. Now, what he's referring to is a girl who labels herself a conservative. She had her Patreon page removed, and in effect, she had her income yanked because she was depending heavily upon Patreon. And I didn't know about this until I saw Josh's post. And obviously, now that I'm using Patreon and speaking about controversial issues, I was really concerned. Lauren Southern, who I had never heard of before this, she posted a YouTube video explaining her side of what happened. And I have the full video for you in the show notes. But here she is reading the letter that she received from Patreon. And I do have to say it was pretty disturbing.
Hey everyone, okay, so as you may know by now, Patreon has kicked me off of their website, essentially eviscerating the majority of my income. You may be wondering, what could their reason for doing this be? Well, let me just read you their email. Hi Lauren, my name is Max, and I am a member of the Trust and Safety team at Patreon. Here at Patreon, we believe in freedom of speech. We are creating a platform that empowers creators to share and debate ideas. When ideas cross into action, though, we sometimes must take a closer look at what our creators are doing with the funds they earn through Patreon. It appears that you are currently raising funds in order to take part in activities that are likely to cause loss of life. We have therefore decided to remove your page from Patreon and paid out your final balance of $95 to you. We understand that this will come as a disappointment. Please know that we have come to this decision after a long review process and will not consider an appeal. Thank you for your understanding.
So when I heard that, two things stood out to me as a content creator. First, they were banning her for activities that would cause loss of life. Now, as far as I knew, this chick was a YouTube commentator. And so, how can words spoken on YouTube cause a loss of life? That didn't make sense to me. So that was one. And then the other thing that stood out is that there was no appeal process. So basically what that told me is that the Patreon overlords cut off her income and that's it. The end. There's no one for her to complain to and no one to look at it a second time. That just seemed really, really wrong to me. And so that was actually enough for me to call my dad, who's also known as my moral compass and business manager. And we had a conversation about whether or not we should cut off our relationship with Patreon, because do I really want to connect Congressional Dish's funding to a company that would so brazenly cut someone off, especially because it appeared to be for political views? And then also, do I just want to do business? Because every time you contribute on Patreon, they do get a cut. They take 5% for themselves, and then there's a 5% transaction or whatever. But basically, 10% of whatever you give Congressional Dish through Patreon does not make it to Congressional Dish. It goes somewhere into the Patreon universe. And so by using them, I am contributing to their platform. So I want to support this? And my dad told me, oh so wisely, that there's two sides to every story and that I would have an opportunity to talk to the Patreon team, obviously at Podcast Movement, because I'm all wrapped up with them at this conference. And so I said, I want to give them a chance to explain their sides. And he said, you probably won't get an explanation because these tech companies, for legal reasons, these businesses don't share their behind the scenes processes for stuff like this. And so what we decided is our best course of action would be to be aware that this happened, which obviously now we are, and to wait and see if this becomes a pattern. And if it does, then we'd make a move. But we decided not to act just based on this isolated incident that I really knew nothing about aside from, the one-sided YouTube video. But I did plan to talk to the Patreon people at Podcast Movement because obviously this is really disturbing. But then a few days later, I actually did get an explanation from Patreon, one I wasn't expecting. And actually, we all got an explanation from the CEO of Patreon, Jack. I think his last name's Conte, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. But the CEO of Patreon put up a YouTube video. And again, I've posted the entire video for you in the show notes. It's 10 minutes long. But here are some of the highlights.
So to recap, Patreon recently took down the pages of all the members of Defend Europe, including Lauren Southern's page. And we also took down the IGD news page as well. Content policy and the decision to remove a creator page has absolutely nothing to do with politics and ideology and has everything to do with a concept called manifest observable behavior. The purpose of using manifest observable behavior is to remove personal values and beliefs when the team is reviewing content. It's a review method that's entirely based on observable facts. What has a camera seen? What has an audio device recorded? It doesn't matter what your intentions are, your motivations, who you are, your identity, your ideology. The Trust and Safety team only looks at manifest observable behavior. We get rigorous and specific because we're talking about removing a person's income. The authority to take away a human being's income is a sobering responsibility. It is not something to be done on a whim. And as a creator myself, I've had videos taken down. I always want Patreon to put creators first. So let's look at the manifest observable behavior. She and a crew successfully stopped a rescue boat in the Mediterranean.
It's stopping, they're slowing down.
As a part of that mission, she directed the boat operator precisely where to go to stop the vessel.
You gotta go in front of the boat.
She told the press she planned to do it again, and she helped a team successfully raise money to purchase a bigger boat.
And at the end, we said we were gonna go out and we were gonna do this again. We were going to find a better way to stop these migrant boats and to stop this illegal trafficking. And we've done just that with your help.
And then they purchased a bigger boat. The Trust and Safety team and the Patreon executive team reviewed this overwhelming body of evidence and manifest observable behavior. Our conclusion was that their actions, if they continued to do what they were doing, were likely to inhibit rescue operations and potentially lead to people dying in the oceans. And that's a violation of a section of our content policy that prohibits creators from threatening to take or from taking action that could lead to harm or loss of life. One thing I want to make clear is that if instead of getting in front of the ship, they had just stayed on the side of the ship, that's totally okay. That is free speech. So over the last few days, it's become clear to me that while Patreon performed a thorough and rigorous investigation to make these decisions, we didn't do a good job clearly communicating those decisions to the creator community. I got a handful of emails from creators asking us why we removed Lauren's page, and all we offered was a short statement about loss of life. We didn't properly invest in an external communications plan, so I want to take this opportunity to just apologize for subpar communication with the community. The perfect creator-first company would not have told a creator that there was no chance for appeal or avenue for recourse. I want our creators to trust that we're being meticulous and rigorous when it comes to important decisions. And we can't make a video like this every time, but at the very least we can open up and be a little transparent about the processes that affect you as a creator on Patreon. So here's what we're going to do about it. We're going to make some commitments right now to the creator and patron communities. We commit to doubling the size of the Trust and Safety team to ensure that we can continue evaluating pages with the right level of detail and rigor, even as Patreon grows. We commit to implementing an appeals process because every creator deserves fair treatment and a second chance. We commit to building a more fleshed out warning system. We commit to continued reform of our process and policy to make sure that it's modern, cutting edge, and keeping up with the speed of culture. We commit to forming a creator council with respected free speech advocates to make sure that our policies are as fair and as unbiased as possible. We commit to improving creator understanding of our guidelines through more transparency and education. We commit to better process for notifying creators of policy warnings and violations. And we commit to better communication with creators in question.
And I totally understand that you might have your own feelings about what you just heard, but all of that makes sense to me. Because I just played you clips, but Jack's video, like I said, it's 10 minutes long. And when you watch it, you actually see these videos that Lauren Southern was filming, and it's very clear to me that what she was doing was not journalism. You know, she wasn't there to watch and document. She was an active participant, and what they were doing looked really dangerous. I mean, they were not only stopping these ships, but they were stopping them like at night. There was no light there, and these are actions where I could see could definitely get people hurt, including the people on Lauren's boat. And so I see where Patreon is coming from. And I also appreciate that Patreon is creating an appeals process, because that was one of the things that really bothered me, and the other commitments that Patreon is making to content creators and supporters like you and I. I mean, I like that they addressed my concerns. But then also, that said, the overall point that Josh made is not lost on me, and I completely support your decision to support Congressional Dish elsewhere, because, you know, Patreon used their position as a middleman to cut off someone's income because they didn't approve of that person's actions. And that's a lot of power. And, you know, this isn't just a Patreon specific thing. That's a middleman thing. And, you know, my sister, who's also the show notes creator, she forwarded me a BuzzFeed article, and we put that in the show notes for you too. But it has a bunch of examples of PayPal and YouTube also cutting off people's funding. Facebook does this too. And so I guess the lesson that I'm taking from this is that we are running a risk when we have middlemen process our financial transactions. And so if you're like Josh, if this is something you're concerned about, there is an easy option for you to cut out all of the middlemen. And that not only removes their power to kill the podcast's funding, but also kills their commission. Because like I just said, Patreon has the 10% that they take out and PayPal takes 3%. And the solution is that what you can do is send checks to the Congressional Dish P.O. Box. And you can do that with handwritten checks, or even easier, you can use the bill pay function and pay Congressional Dish like you would any other bill. And you can do that with one time, you know, like the big checks, or you can set up recurring checks. And then you can also use online transfer services. And we have quite a few people now that have chosen to do this, and it works beautifully. People are using Chase Quick Pay and Pop Money and PayElectric.com. And there's a bunch of these services. And if you want to do this, just email me and I will email you the bank account and routing number. But basically, if you choose not to use a middleman, then they can't do this to us. But the bottom line when it comes to Patreon is that I'm okay with Patreon's reasons for stopping Lauren Southern's page, and I completely understand if you're not. But I see what she's doing by buying those big boats to go play Border Patrol. I see that as physically dangerous. And so, yeah, I'm still uncomfortable with the fact that they have the power to cut off someone's income like that. But we do have over 180 people who want to use Patreon who have signed up already, and I'm sure there's more that will choose to do so in the future. And so I'm not going to eliminate that option over this. Because like I said, you don't have to use Patreon or PayPal for that matter. So the funding decision, how we do this, that's really in your hands, not mine. But yeah, but as far as Josh is concerned, Josh, like I said, he sent me that note. So thank you so much. I did not know about this until you told me. But then he also switched over to the Patreon at a $2.06 per month, which he said is $1 per episode. So Josh, I appreciate everything about you. And thank you very much. And let's see, we also do have a few more Patreon subscribers that have signed up, although I do have to say overall Patreon, since this happened, our Patreon is going in the down direction. So this has made up for some of the losses, but there have been some losses on Patreon. So, and actually this has been going on for the past few months. We've either been steady on Patreon or going down, which is not amazing, but but I am happy to say that Ben Barnett is now contributing $11.70 per episode, and I know why you did that. So thank you, Ben. I appreciate that you have my back. We also have Elzard Sikema, who's contributing $10 an episode. We also got a raise from Michael Stocco. He was contributing $5 a month on PayPal, and now he's doing $5 an episode on Patreon. So thank you, Michael. We also have Dapo Agontoyinbo. I'm positive I just butchered your name. I'm sorry, Dapo, but thank you for the $5 per episode. Sarah Rush is now contributing $3 per episode. Thank you, Sarah. We're getting $2.50 an episode from Cabin Moon, and this is another person who switched. This is someone who is paying $5 a month on PayPal and is now contributing $2.50 an episode on Cabin. So it's on Patreon. I'm tired, guys. This episode took a lot of my brain power. But yes, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you continuing to support the podcast. And then Eric Northrup is contributing $1 per episode. And in case you haven't picked up on it by now, Patreon does a per episode thing. If you want to contribute per month, you can do that with paper checks or with PayPal. And so the people who have chosen to do that includes Nick and Tori Fox. They gave the podcast a raise. I'm now getting $50 a month in the form of a paper check from Austin, Texas. Wonderful town. And there's a note that says, "Hey, Jen, thanks for reaching out. So this is one of those where PayPal just dropped the subscription. They just do that sometimes, which is another problem with having a middleman control our finances. But this was someone that got dropped by PayPal. I sent them a quick email to say like, hey, this happened. And so they set up a paper check. So that's amazing. Nick and Tori said, I'm assuming this is Nick. So Nick says, my wife and I have both really enjoyed the past few episodes and sharing them with friends and family. Thanks for doing what you do. I couldn't be more grateful as Congressional Dish is one of the few sources of current events left that I will pay attention to anymore, given that the rest is just shitty. Cheers, Nick and Tori Fox. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm having trouble finding sources I like to listen to. Also, I still listen to District Sentinel. I still listen to No Agenda. I've started listening to Intercepted. This is Jeremy Scahill's podcast. It's really good. And Glenn Greenwald, he co-hosted an episode last week. That's one that's now on my regular list. Other than that, I mean, it's just C-SPAN. Lots and lots of C-SPAN. But I love C-SPAN, so that doesn't bother me. And hey, by the way, you have C-SPAN also, so you guys go watch some C-SPAN. It's more entertaining than you think. Let's see. We're also getting a $50 check from Catherine Nitsky. Thank you, Catherine. She's from New Richmond, Wisconsin. We're getting $17.76 through PayPal from John Dunham of Marlborough, Vermont. And he also sent a note. He said, "Hi, Jen. I just wanted to send you a note to let you know I finally subscribed to the show. I've been listening since last November when I heard you on Kara's Talk Nerdy podcast after the election." I love Kara. She just won an Emmy, by the way. Was it an Emmy? Yeah, it was an Emmy. God, she's the best. So, Kara, if you're listening, congratulations. But yeah, back to his note, he said, "I haven't sent you any money in that time, but it's no reflection on the value you provide with Congressional Dish, just a reflection on the fact that my partner was laid off last November as well." Oh, I'm so sorry. That's so hard. But I thought it was high time I started contributing to your work, so I've set up a monthly PayPal subscription of $17.76. Again, this is no way a commentary on how much I value your work, just what I know I can regularly afford between other bills, student loans, and such. Hey, I appreciate you contributing whatever you can. I also want you to know that I really enjoyed the past 2 episodes on the post office and air traffic control. In a media environment where it's all about Trump all the time, it's really refreshing and helpful to learn about the other things that aren't the latest stupid tweet or misguided attempt to take away people's healthcare. Which, I guess that was my last episode, but the healthcare stuff is important. But like I said, I'm going to lay off that for a while, but I get your point. Back to his note, he said, I've also really enjoyed both Puerto Rico episodes, having gone back in the archives to listen to the first one. I'm interested in whatever you choose to research for us, but please keep doing shows on things that aren't front and center elsewhere or aren't getting the attention we need to understand them. I'm hoping that this episode falls in that category for you because it sure as hell did for me. I mean, it's crazy to me that I've been watching Congress now for 5 years and stuff like this can still pop up where I go like, what the hell is this? FirstNet was created in 2012. So was Congressional Dish. So yeah, I'm just amazed at how much I'm still learning all the time by watching Congress. There's so much going on that we don't know about. Back to your note, he said, that for me is the greatest value of your work. If a functional democracy relies on an informed electorate, you are one of the few people I see actively working to inform. All the best, John Dunham. Thank you very much. I love that note, and I really appreciate your support. We also got a raise from Jason Katzenbach. This was a raise from $5 a month to $5.35, so thank you, Jason. We are also now getting $2.06 per month from Cameron Evans of Burlington, Kentucky. What up, Middle America? See, I say it all the time, but we are not as, what do I say all the time? Oh, brain failing me. It's something along the lines of, we are more united than we seem. But Cameron had a note for me. He said, hey, Jen, I've been a long-time listener to the podcast. I joined up after the Reddit AMA you did a couple of years ago. And now that I'm fresh out of high school and have my own bank account, I thought I should start paying my fair share for the invaluable service you provide. Oh, Cameron, thank you so much. I love it that young people are listening to Congressional Dish as much as they are. I mean, this is where my hope comes from. This is why I still do this stuff. This is why, with all of the negative things that are going on, I honestly believe that when this generation, when we take the power away from them, because do you know that officially by 2020, we are going to outnumber the baby boomers. So if we want to take the power away from our parents' generation, we get to very, very soon. And so now that you've finished high school, you get to vote. And I'm really glad that I think you're going to. But yeah, back to Cameron's note, he said, because of you and this show, I developed a tremendous interest in policy and government throughout my high school years, at least the ones worth remembering. I got to participate in my school's first ever government and politics course and even organized a school-wide mock election last year. Things I don't think I would have ever done without the influence your show has had on my life. Oh my God. I want to express the deep gratitude I feel towards you for providing me with an avenue to develop this fascinating and a lot of the time maddening hobby of Congress watching. Having something like your show to look forward to and a hobby to engross myself in got me out of the emotional rut I was in. Anyway, I'm probably just rambling now. No, not at all. But the main point I'm trying to make is thank you. Cameron, thank you. Thank you for taking action. Thank you for giving a crap. Thank you for watching Congress. See, it's not that bad. I love it. And once you know the characters, it gets really entertaining, especially the hearings. So I'm glad that you developed the same hobby that I have. I think it's a constructive one. It's definitely better than drinking. But yeah, Cameron, I am so overwhelmed by that. Thank you so much. It makes this worth it to hear you say that. It really does. And then, okay, he did put in a couple PPSs. This one I think I should share. He said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I just noticed that the Amazon search bar doesn't show up on your site if you have an ad blocker enabled there. It might be helpful if you added a note to let people know that, because I was confused about that for a while. Very good idea. I will ask someone to update that on the website. But yeah, that is a good point. If you have an ad blocker up, it is difficult to see it's impossible to see the Amazon search box. So thanks for letting us know that. And you guys, if I forget to add that note to the website, please keep reminding me, because as you can hear right now, I'm a little spent. So I'm just not going to go and work on the website right now. But yes, it's an excellent idea. I should put that disclaimer in there. But yeah, thank you, Cameron. I adore you, and I'm so happy to have you on the team. So thank you. Then we also got some one-time contributions this month. One of them, this was wonderful. We got $250 from Stephen Loudermilk of Huntersville, North Carolina. And on the check, he wrote, "The awesome podcast." And Stephen, thank you so much. That made a very big difference this month. July was a really rough month for the podcast, probably because I only did one episode, but still, it was a rough month. But yeah, thank you so much. We also got a $50 check from Nicholas Fox of Austin, Texas, which is funny because Nick Fox was in the subscription section. I think you are also from Austin, Texas. Yeah. So I'll just thank you twice, but thank you, Nick and Tori. We also got an anonymous $50. Thank you. You know who you are. We got $25 from Richard Weil. Thank you, Richard. We got an anonymous Bitcoin contribution of about $25. And Bitcoin just did something weird where they basically split the Bitcoins that we have. So now I have Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. I don't understand that at all. But yeah, all the Bitcoins you guys have given me, I still have. So theoretically, they may have just doubled. I don't understand what just happened. But yeah, still taking Bitcoin, still doing nothing with it, just kind of seeing what happens. But yeah, I appreciate the contribution. We also got a check for $20 from John and Jennifer Bomarito. They're from Worthington, Ohio. So thank you, John and Jennifer. We got $20 from Denise Koft-Ecke. Thank you, Denise. We also got a $15 check from someone who would like to remain anonymous, which is fine. Thank you for the check. We got $15 on PayPal from Patrick Gary, who said you provide a great public service. Thanks. And thank you. And we got a $10.01 anonymous check. Thank you very much. We got a $10 PayPal contribution from Michael McAllen of Oakland, California. What up, neighbor? And Michael left a note who said, "Hi, so I enjoy your podcast very much. I am out of work myself as we have a new baby." Oh, congratulations. "It seems you had a tough July, and I'm sorry about your grandpa." I did, and thank you very much. "I think you should reconsider taking the right ads." Oh, for Christ's sake. Like a Blue Apron or something like that. I understand your stance, but you always sound depressed about money all the time. No, I'm not depressed about money. At this point, the podcast, it's paying for itself, which is nice. It's just a inconsistent funding model, and I get stressed about that. But I'm not taking ads. It's just I'm not doing it. And I think that I've given this reason so many times, but I think it's corrupting. What if I was taking ads that from a company that's somehow connected to AT&T for this episode? Because at this point, what isn't AT&T involved in? And so like I said, I just did this whole thing about how even being connected to Patreon and PayPal, it enables other companies to pull my funding. I do not want to give Blue Apron or any other fucking company the ability to do that. So no ads. Stop asking me to take ads. I'm not doing it. Sorry to yell at you. I know that you're contributing to the podcast, but I'm not taking ads. That's all I'm saying about that. Back to Michael's note, he said, "Your information is awesome, and I just sent another email to my friend at the Bill Maher Show." Ooh, that would be fun. He said, "You need to get on there." That would be fun. I'm down. Anyway, I appreciate the hard work, and I can't donate more than this at this time. I'm in Oakland if you ever want to grab a copy with me and a 6-month-old. I will be at Podcast Movement also. Awesome. Great work, and thank you, Mike. Mike, I'm going to be all over Podcast Movement. So if this is your first one, come to the newbie orientation in the happy hour or just the happy hour. I don't know where it's going to be yet, but let's see. I will have one more episode come out before Podcast Movement. So I'll tell you in the next episode where we're doing the happy hour. Also, I'll have a table at the Patreon Awards after party. And then I'm speaking on Thursday. I think my time is 11. I'm speaking about how to find information about your government. So considering you're a supporter of Congressional Dish, you might really like that one. So yeah, come and meet me. I would love to say hello. But yeah, thanks, Michael. We also got $10 from Greg Hudson, who said, "Keep up the good work, Jen. I do government affairs work for my union, and I've turned on other members to your podcast. They love it." Wonderful. Thank you for sharing the podcast and for contributing. I really appreciate it. We also got $10 from Daniel and William Orr of Ocean City, New Jersey. I think is that not where the Jersey Shore kids were for a while? I can't remember, but I do love the ocean areas of New Jersey. So thank you for contributing. We also got $10 from Stephanie Adzit of Seattle, Washington, where I believe it was 114 degrees. And I don't think I'm exaggerating the other day. That's insane. So I hope it wasn't actually that hot, but I did see that somewhere on Twitter. So that is bananas. We also got $10 from Roya. She's one of my sister's oldest friends, but she's my friend too. And she's supporting my podcast, which is so cool. Roya, I adore you. Oh, and congratulations. She married Alfredo. And I don't think he likes it when I call him that, but I don't care. So congratulations on your marriage. And I hope to see you soon. Let's see. We also got a $5 bonus from Joseph Clarici. He's a regular Patreon subscriber, and he said, sorry to hear about your family's recent loss. Thank you. Just sent in an extra $5 to help make up the shortfall from those of us who contribute per episode on Patreon. Thank you for doing that. I figure if we cubicle jockeys who don't work nearly as hard get paid leave for such circumstances, you deserve it too. That's really kind of you. And that's a really good point. Yeah, because I don't, if I don't produce an episode, I don't get anything. So it's a lot like waiting tables, actually, which is why the name Congressional Dish continues to fit. But yeah, back to his note, he said, listening to the latest healthcare episode, great work as usual. Although, you know what I just said is kind of bullshit. That's true for Patreon, but the people who contribute monthly, those subscriptions and the paper checks, those people still paid me in July, even though I did have to take one episode off to go to Grandpa's funeral. So to those people, thank you for providing me some bereavement time off. You know, I needed it. I just needed it. So, but yes, thank you very much. And you guys are the best. Back to his note, he said, listening to the latest healthcare episode, great work as usual. I hadn't heard about the various bills until now. Glad you kept on top of everything happening outside the mainstream media spotlight. I hope in the coming weeks you'll spend some time discussing the bipartisan Stop Arming Terrorists Act introduced in the House by Tulsi Gabbard and in the Senate by Rand Paul, which inexplicably GovTrack gives only an 8% chance of passing. Okay, so I know what you're talking about here. I'm not going to go into that because A, it's only been introduced in the House and the Senate, and I don't think that it's going to move anywhere because we have a Republican Congress that's pretty much fine with all the wars. But what did happen, and this is something I want to go into more depth when they do some hearings on it. I mean, I need to go into the not C-SPAN hearings and see if I can find anything on our war activities. But right now, I mean, I know that the CIA has finally stopped the program that they were, that we kind of knew about from all those hearings that we had watched where they were arming members of Al-Qaeda and they were calling them the moderate rebels. But basically we were giving weapons to people in Syria to overthrow the government. We had been doing this for years and Trump just put a stop to that. So even without the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, it's kind of already happening. It's one of the few good things that I think Trump has done. I mean, as in few, I mean, there's two. That's one of them. And he didn't sign the TPP. That's it. Those are the two. But there are two. So as far as the need for that bill, I don't think it's needed quite as much as it was just a month ago. And then as for GovTrack and their like percentages of passing, I don't even pay attention to those and you shouldn't either. They don't mean anything. So it doesn't matter. In fact, I think 8% is kind of high. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that thing is going to move any further during this Congress. And so that's why I'm not going to spend any time on it. I understand why you want me to, but no, I'm going to follow things that are actually, possible. But back to his note, he said, I've been following this for a while and the context just got a little bit more interesting in light of the administration ending the CIA program to support Syrian rebel groups. See, this guy knows what's up. I realize that you try and focus on bills that have gotten further in the process, but I hope you will make an exception here. Unless it moves further, I'm just not going to. There's too much going on. We have a lot of government funding things going on. Like I said, I need to find some hearings about what's going on in our wars and what Trump's doing. I mean, the Republicans, they're just not all that interested in investigating any of this stuff. That's one of the things when I think about 2018, if we're going to do that thing where we say we only have choices between the Republicans and Democrats, which, as you know, I don't really believe. But in some districts, that is the truth. You will have it narrowed down to two, especially here in California and in Washington, where they do the top two primary thing. But if that is your option, one of the benefits of having the Democrats in control of Congress next is that whichever branch they get control of, if not both of them, they'll have investigative powers. And so they will be able to have hearings where they look into this type of stuff because the Republicans are just not interested. Like, I just found out that Wells Fargo, apparently, and this is not something I've read up on, this is all hearsay, so let's not look in the show notes for this. I'm not entirely sure what I'm talking about. But Wells Fargo, apparently, for years, was signing up their customers for car insurance policies. Because you remember, Wells Fargo was signing people up for bank accounts that they hadn't asked for. And then they switched it. I guess they also were doing this with car insurance. And there were something like 200,000 people that got their cars taken away from them because they hadn't paid the bills on this car insurance that Wells Fargo had signed them up for illegally, basically. And Wells Fargo used the fine print in their contracts, which say that you have to have mandatory arbitration, which means that you can't do a class action lawsuit. So these 200,000 people that lost their cars, or however many it was, I don't know, But all these people that had their cars taken away from them, they couldn't band together and sue Wells Fargo because of that arbitration clause. So this is something that Congress should get involved in. And all of the Democrats have asked the Republicans to do a hearing, and they're not doing it. So this is what I mean about, like, you know, the two parties are not the same. And right now, where we do have this executive branch that is run by Donald Trump, and we have all this crazy stuff going on with these multinational corporations doing shady shit, I do think that it would be helpful if the Democratic Party had at least one branch of government to do some investigations, because they're just not happening right now, and it's making me nuts. But this is what I'm saying. There's a lot going on right now, and I'm just not going to follow a bill that's only been introduced. And it seems like you knew that before I even said it. So I hope you're not upset, Joe, and I do appreciate your support, but I'm sticking with that decision. And then last, we also got $5 from Katie Silva. So thank you, Katie. Oh, and actually, that's not last. We also got a couple checks from Bud Johnson. And Bud, we don't really know what to do with your checks because you are a subscriber. And so technically subscribers don't get thanked on every show, but Bud Johnson gets thanked on every show because he sends in physical cards. He writes out his check. He writes out notes. I mean, Bud is he's one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And so I did get 2 checks from Bud in the last month. He recommends that, well, I'll just read his note. He said, Jen, have you seen Hacking Democracy from 2006? No, I haven't. The film shows the electronic voting machine frauds as well as discussing many aspects of corruption in our voting process. That's another thing I want to do an episode on, because when you talk about influence in our election, there's so much influence, negative influence in our elections right now that has jack shit to do with Russia. So we do need to talk about that. And that is a part of it. These fucking voting machines, we shouldn't be using them. But anyway, back to Bud's note. He said, also, Greg Palast did a movie just before the 2016 election about crosscheck. Yes, that thing's crazy too. It was recently exposed and nothing was done in Georgia on a District 6 election. And it makes me feel frustrated and makes me question, does our vote actually count? Bernie Sanders and the nasty DNC debacle last summer is a big hack to our democracy. I think our voting process might make for a good Congressional Dish podcast. I think so too. And just so you know, I love Congressional Dish 100 and listen to it again. I think that's the Jack Abramoff interview. And so he said that was the best podcast. Well, Bud, if you can just go to Podchaser and vote for the Jack Abramoff interview, that would be wonderful. And that way, maybe that's the one that they highlight in the article, the Patreon article. But thank you, Bud. And then in the second note, he said, Jen, congrats. Oh, and these were checks that came with it for $5 and then $5.24. But he said, Jen, congrats on the Patreon table coming in August. Totally cool. Thank you for the golf swing over your cuss words. Hey, I cuss in a New York minute, but you are right. It offends some folks, and I find the golf swing humorous. So thank you. This healthcare scrapping repub driven is so irresponsible. I am so sick of it. So sorry about the loss of your grandfather, your friend Bud. And thank you very much. And Grandpa will be forever missed. But yeah, I think that is it for the day. I do want to thank all of the regular subscribers. You guys did keep the podcast going in July because, like I said, the one-time contributions, you just heard them. There weren't a ton. And yeah, Patreon, my usual income was cut in half. But yeah, I needed the break. There was nothing I can do about it. So I really appreciate you guys. And next episode, I'm not sure yet. I still have to do my presentation. It's due this weekend for Podcast Movement. I'm just so overwhelmed. And so, yeah, I'm going to finish that. And then on Monday, I will figure out what the next episode is going to be. It's one of those situations where I have so much to talk about. I don't really know what to tackle next. But yeah, until I talk to you again, and when I have my brain back, I am so mentally drained after recording these episodes. I really should wait a day between doing the episodes and the thank yous because I'm unable to speak properly when I'm done. But yeah, until you hear from me again, I hope you have a wonderful 2 weeks of summer. Stay cool, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end he'll justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense,